Eleanor Vance believed her daughter was her greatest masterpiece. Clara was beautiful, educated at the finest schools, and poised to marry into a family of equal, if not greater, standing. So when Clara brought home Ethan, a quiet architect with unassuming clothes and a gentle demeanor, Eleanor saw not a man, but a flaw in her design. For 3 years she treated him with a condescension as polished and sharp as the silverware in her dining room. She saw him as a temporary diversion, a youthful rebellion. But then came the pregnancy, and Eleanor's simmering disapproval ignited into a cold, focused fury. She told everyone, her friends at the club, distant relatives, anyone who would listen, that this quiet, unremarkable man had trapped her perfect daughter. The campaign was relentless, a series of whispers and pronouncements designed to sever the bond she couldn't control. It all culminated at the Vance family's annual spring gala, a sprawling affair held in the manicured gardens of their estate. Eleanor, sensing her victory was near, cornered Ethan by the roaring outdoor fireplace. In front of a cluster of influential guests, she presented her ultimatum, her voice carrying with theatrical clarity. "We all want what's best for Clara," she announced, a predatory smile playing on her lips. "And to clear up any lingering doubts about this situation, a paternity test is the only sensible path forward to protect the family line." The silence was a physical weight. Clara looked pale, her eyes pleading with Ethan, yet she said nothing. Ethan, however, did not look cornered. He looked calm. He met his mother-in-law's triumphant gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Of course, Eleanor. I'll do it." What Eleanor didn't know was that Ethan had already agreed to the test weeks ago. What she couldn't possibly imagine was that he had requested a far more comprehensive analysis than simple paternity. In his pocket, his fingers brushed against a simple, crisp envelope. It contained results that would not just answer her question, but would detonate the entire foundation of the Vance family legacy. Eleanor Vance thought she was exposing a fraud. She had no idea she was about to be exposed herself. This story is a powerful one, and I'm so glad you're here to experience it with us. Before we dive into how this all began, if you enjoy stories about justice and seeing hidden truths come to light, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more narratives like this to you. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see our community stretch all across the globe. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the moment the first crack appeared in the perfect facade of the Vance family. 3 years earlier, the world had felt simpler to Ethan. He'd met Clara not at a gala or a high society auction, but in the quiet, dusty aisles of a university architectural library. She was researching historical preservation for a passion project. He was there for the sheer love of the form, sketching cornices from a century-old textbook. Their connection was immediate and cerebral. They talked for hours, their conversation a seamless construction of shared ideas and burgeoning affection. Clara was unlike anyone he had ever met from her world. She seemed untainted by the obsession with status that he knew defined her social circle. She was drawn to his passion, his quiet confidence, and the way he saw the world not as a series of transactions, but as a structure to be understood and appreciated. For his part, Ethan was utterly captivated. He saw past the name Vance and the subtle indicators of old money, the perfect teeth, the casual mention of summering in the Hamptons, and saw a woman with a genuine, curious soul. He had spent years building his own world, a world of immense success hidden behind a veil of deliberate simplicity. He was the sole, anonymous founder of Nexus Design, a global architectural consultancy that handled billion-dollar projects, but he operated publicly through a small local firm, allowing him to engage with the craft he loved without the suffocating pressures of the corporate spotlight. He found a strange peace in being underestimated, in being just Ethan, the architect. He told Clara he was a partner at a small firm, which was technically true, and she never questioned it. She loved him for the man he was in those library aisles, and for a time, that was enough. The first meeting with her parents was a carefully orchestrated affair at the Vance estate. The house was less a home and more a museum of their own importance. Polished marble floors reflected ancestral portraits, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and generational wealth. Eleanor Vance greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her handshake was brief, her fingers cold, as if she were touching something unpleasant. Her husband, Robert Vance, was a quieter presence, a man who seemed to have been worn down by the sheer force of his wife's personality. He offered Ethan a limp handshake and a weary, non-committal smile. The dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. "So, Ethan," Eleanor began, delicately cutting into her filet mignon, "Clara tells us you're an architect, a noble profession. Are you with one of the major firms? Sterling and Croft, perhaps? We know the Sterlings." The question was a chess move, designed to place him on the board. "No, I'm a partner at a smaller, local practice. Crestwood Designs," Ethan replied calmly, his voice even. He felt Clara's hand tense on his knee under the table. Eleanor's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. "Crestwood? I can't say I've heard of it. Do you handle residential projects mostly?" The implication was clear: small, insignificant, suburban. "We handle a variety of projects," Ethan said, not taking the bait. "I find the diversity of the work fulfilling." Eleanor turned to her husband. "Robert, you remember the Hendersons' new summer home, designed by that brilliant young man from MIT? Now that was a structure, a statement." She then turned back to Ethan, her point made. "It's all about making a statement, isn't it? Leaving a mark?" Throughout the evening, the pattern continued. Every statement Ethan made was met with a subtle correction, a condescending comparison, or an outright dismissal. Eleanor spoke of their family's lineage, of the industrialists and financiers that populated their family tree, painting a world where a person's worth was determined by their pedigree. Ethan, with his unknown parents and his local firm, was, in her eyes, a genetic and social dead end. He was a weed in her meticulously cultivated garden. Clara tried, in her own gentle way, to bridge the gap. "Mother, Ethan designed the new wing for the city's art museum. The critics called it revolutionary." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "A public works project. Charity is important, of course, but it doesn't build a legacy." Ethan watched Clara's face fall, saw the familiar flicker of disappointment that came from a lifetime of failing to meet her mother's impossible standards. He saw in that moment the central conflict of their future. He loved this woman, but her love was tied to an anchor of maternal approval that he would never be able to lift. He squeezed her hand under the table, a silent promise that he was there, that he could withstand the storm. He had weathered far worse in boardrooms with ruthless developers and cutthroat competitors. He could surely handle one arrogant woman, but he underestimated the insidious nature of her campaign. It wasn't a frontal assault, but a slow, creeping poison. That first dinner was just the overture. The true performance of his humiliation was yet to begin. He left the Vance estate that night with the taste of expensive wine and cheap insults in his mouth, knowing that the foundation of his life with Clara would have to be built on contested ground. The months that followed their engagement were a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by Eleanor with chilling precision. The humiliations were never overt enough to warrant a dramatic confrontation, but were instead a series of carefully placed barbs and public slights, each one designed to erode Ethan's standing and isolate him from Clara's world. The engagement party itself was the first major battleground. Eleanor had insisted on hosting it at the family's exclusive country club, a bastion of old money and rigid social hierarchy. Ethan, dressed in a perfectly tailored but understated suit, felt the eyes on him the moment he walked in. Eleanor glided through the room, introducing him with a subtle but devastating turn of phrase. "This is Ethan," she would say, her voice bright and brittle, "Clara's fiancé." The pause was just long enough to be noticeable, a small pocket of air filled with unspoken judgment. She would then immediately turn the conversation to the accomplishments of someone else's son, a doctor, a lawyer, a banker, leaving Ethan standing as a silent, irrelevant postscript. He found himself trapped in a conversation with two of Eleanor's closest friends, women with identical hairstyles and expressions of bored superiority. "Clara has always had such a charitable heart," one of them said, looking Ethan up and down as if inspecting a piece of furniture for auction. "It's so admirable that she looks past material things." "Oh, absolutely," the other chimed in. My daughter is marrying a wonderful boy. His family founded the Harrison Trust. It's just such a relief, to know she'll be taken care of. The message was crystalline. Ethan was a charity case, a project. He simply smiled, a calm, unreadable expression on his face. Clara and I take care of each other. That's the foundation we're building on. His words were met with blank stares. He was speaking a language they didn't understand. The true nadir of the evening came during the toasts. Robert Vance gave a brief, mumbled speech. Then Eleanor took the floor. She spoke glowingly of Clara's childhood, her achievements, her bright future. When she finally mentioned Ethan, it was with a tone of magnanimous pity. "And we welcome Ethan into our family," she said, raising her glass. "We hope he can find his footing and build a life worthy of our daughter." It was a blessing that sounded like a curse, an embrace that felt like a shove. The room applauded politely. Ethan saw Clara shrink beside him, her smile tight and painful. She clutched his arm, but she said nothing. She didn't grab the microphone and defend him. She didn't challenge her mother. She just stood there, a silent, beautiful casualty in a war she refused to fight. Later that night, as they drove home, the silence in the car was heavy. "She doesn't mean it like it sounds," Clara said finally, her voice small. "How does she mean it, Clara?" Ethan asked, his own voice gentle, devoid of accusation. "She's just protective. She thinks in terms of providers and security. It's how she was raised. She doesn't see that you provide me with a different kind of security, a better kind." "And does she need to see it?" Ethan pressed, parking the car in front of their modest, tastefully designed home. A home he had designed and built himself. A detail Eleanor had once dismissed as quaint. "I want her to," Clara whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I want you two to get along." "I get along with your mother just fine," Ethan said, turning to face her. "The problem is, your mother doesn't get along with me, and you let her. You stand there, and you let her slice pieces off me, because you're more afraid of her disappointment than you are of my pain." The truth of the statement hung between them, stark and undeniable. It was the first time he had made the subtext explicit, and the impact was visible on her face. It was a crack in their own foundation. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the cool, smooth metal of his watch. It was a simple, elegant piece with a leather strap, something that would go unnoticed by the Rolex and Patek crowd at the club. To them, it was worthless. But it had been a personal gift from a reclusive, world-renowned artist for whom Ethan had designed a private museum, a project so secret and so prestigious it was spoken of only in whispers at the highest echelons of his profession. The watch was a symbol of his hidden world, a tangible reminder that Eleanor's valuation of him was based on ignorance. It was his symbolic object, a touchstone of his true power. He held it, a silent vow to himself that this humiliation would not last forever. He would be patient. He would be strategic. He would wait for the right moment to rebuild their world on a foundation of truth, even if it meant tearing down the old one first. The announcement of Clara's pregnancy should have been a moment of pure joy. For Ethan, it was. When Clara told him, her face alight with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. A child. A new life that was a testament to their love. It felt like the final perfect brick being laid in the home of their life together. He imagined a future filled with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the quiet joy of building a family on their own terms. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Eleanor would not see a new life. She would see a cage. They decided to tell her parents over dinner. At the Vance estate, of course. The atmosphere was already tense. Eleanor had spent the weeks since the engagement party subtly undermining their wedding plans, questioning every choice from the venue to the guest list, framing each of Ethan's preferences as evidence of his poor taste and lower-class upbringing. When Clara, her voice trembling slightly, finally made the announcement, "Mother, Dad, I'm pregnant," the reaction was immediate and seismic. Robert's face went slack with surprise, a flicker of what might have been happiness in his tired eyes, but Eleanor's expression hardened into one of cold fury. She placed her fork and knife down on her plate with a sharp click that echoed in the sudden silence. "Well," she said, her voice dangerously low, "you finally did it, Ethan. You trapped her." Clara gasped. "Mother, that's a horrible thing to say." "Is it?" Eleanor shot back, her eyes locked on Ethan. "Or is it simply the truth? You knew you couldn't hold on to her. You knew you could never give her the life she deserves. So you did the one thing that would bind her to you forever, a child. It's a classic, pathetic move. And frankly, I'm disappointed you fell for it, Clara." Ethan remained perfectly still. He had anticipated this. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He would not give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. He looked at Clara, whose face was crumbling, and then back at his mother-in-law. "This child wasn't a move, Eleanor. It's the product of a marriage. It's our child, and I would have thought, as a grandmother-to-be, you'd be happy." "Happy?" Eleanor laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I'm horrified. My daughter's future, her potential, all of it squandered because of your desperate middle-class ambition." The Vance line, sullied. That was when the campaign began in earnest. Eleanor was no longer content with subtle insults. She went on the offensive. She called her friends, weaving a narrative of a scheming, penniless architect who had seduced and entrapped her innocent daughter. She told family members that they had deep concerns about the stability of the relationship and the circumstances of the pregnancy. The poison spread. At social functions, people would look at Ethan with a mixture of pity and contempt. Strangers would approach Clara with unsolicited advice, telling her it was never too late to reconsider her options. The pressure on Clara was immense. She was caught in an impossible position. Her loyalty stretched to its breaking point. She loved Ethan, and she loved their unborn child. But a lifetime of conditioning to please her mother was a powerful force. Their arguments became more frequent, always circling the same painful drain. "Why won't you just stand up to her, Clara?" Ethan would ask, his patience wearing thin. "It's not that simple. You don't know what she's like. She'll cut me off. She'll turn the whole family against us," Clara would cry, her hands twisting in her lap. "Is that what you're afraid of? Losing her money? Or losing her love?" The question was cruel, but it was honest. "It's not the money," she would insist, though even she sounded unsure. It was during one of these arguments that Eleanor's ultimate weapon was first mentioned. In a fit of desperation, Clara let it slip. "She's talking about demanding proof that the baby is even yours." Ethan stopped. The noise of the argument faded, replaced by a sudden, cold clarity. There it was, the final, unforgivable insult. The public declaration that he was not only a gold digger, but a cuckold, that her daughter might have been unfaithful. Eleanor would burn her own daughter's reputation just to scorch him. A quiet, dangerous calm settled over Ethan. This was the move that would change the game. She had overplayed her hand. "All right," he said, his voice so soft that Clara had to lean in to hear him. "All right." The next day, he made a phone call. Not to a lawyer, not yet. He called a Dr. Alistair Finch, the head of a private genetic research lab in Switzerland that Nexus Design had once commissioned to build a state-of-the-art facility. "Alistair," Ethan said, his voice calm and clear. "I need a favor. I need the most comprehensive DNA analysis you can run. A full familial panel, and I need it to be absolutely discreet." He was no longer just defending himself. He was preparing his counteroffensive. He would give Eleanor the proof she wanted, but he would also uncover a truth she had spent a lifetime bearing. The quiet war of attrition was over. It was time to prepare for total victory. The weeks leading up to the Vance family's annual spring gala were the quiet before the storm. The air in Ethan and Clara's home was thick with unspoken tension. Clara was a ghost in her own life, moving through the days with a haunted, anxious energy. She was now visibly pregnant, and her conditions seemed to amplify her distress, her body a constant reminder of the conflict that was tearing her world apart. She tried to broach the subject of her mother's demand with Ethan, but he would gently steer the conversation away. "It's being handled, Clara," he would say, his voice a calm reassurance that she found both comforting and terrifying. She didn't understand his lack of anger, his almost serene acceptance of the ultimate humiliation. She mistook his patience for weakness, his strategy for surrender. Meanwhile, Eleanor Vance was radiating smug confidence. She had successfully framed the narrative. In her social circles, the paternity test was no longer a shocking demand, but a sensible precaution, a mother's prudent measure to protect her daughter's interests. She had made her private vendetta seem like a public service. She decided the gala would be the perfect stage for the final act. It was the family's signature event, a lavish affair that drew a curated list of the city's most powerful and influential figures. It was the ideal venue to publicly vindicate herself and permanently cast Ethan out. She called Clara to inform her of the plan. "We'll do it at the gala," she announced, her voice dripping with false concern. "We'll have a private room, just the family. We'll open the results, clear the air, and then we can all move forward. It will be a relief for everyone, darling." When Clara relayed this to Ethan, her voice was barely a whisper. She wants to do it there, at the party, in front of everyone. Ethan was in his home office, looking over the blueprints for a new sustainable city project in Scandinavia. He didn't look up from the plans. "That sounds like her," he said, his tone neutral. He made a small notation on the blueprint with a graphite pencil. "Tell her we'll be there." Clara stared at his back, bewildered. "Ethan, aren't you furious? Don't you see what she's doing? She's turning it into a spectacle." He finally turned in his chair to face her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a flicker of the immense controlled power he usually kept so well hidden. His eyes were like dark, calm water. "Yes, I do. She's building a stage. She just doesn't realize the play isn't the one she wrote." He stood up and walked over to her, gently taking her hands in his. "Clara, I need you to trust me. Not your mother, not your fear, me. Can you do that?" She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his face, and for the first time, a sliver of hope cut through her anxiety. She nodded, a single jerky movement. "Okay, Ethan, I trust you." The day before the gala, a secure courier delivered a slim, unassuming envelope to Ethan's office at Crestwood Designs. It bore the seal of the Swiss laboratory. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Dr. Finch had already called him with the results, his voice grave and professional over the encrypted line. The information was exactly what Ethan had suspected, yet hearing it confirmed was like feeling the deep subterranean shift of tectonic plates. A world was about to break apart. He placed the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket. It was the symbolic object, no longer just a representation of his hidden power, but the very instrument of its release. That evening, he sat in the quiet of his living room, the city lights twinkling outside. He thought about the man he was 3 years ago, sketching in a library, believing love could conquer all. He had been naive. Love didn't conquer. It endured. It adapted. And sometimes, to protect it, you had to become a warrior. He had never wanted this fight. He had been content in his quiet, underestimated existence. But Eleanor had pushed him, relentlessly, backing him into a corner. She thought the corner was a trap. She was about to learn it was a command center. Tomorrow, he would walk into the heart of her kingdom, not as a supplicant to be judged, but as a force of reckoning. The humiliation was over. The accounting was about to begin. The Vance estate was a symphony of manufactured perfection. Hundreds of guests drifted across the sprawling lawns, their laughter mixing with the gentle strains of a string quartet. Fairy lights were strung through the ancient oak trees, casting a warm, ethereal glow on the meticulously curated scene. To any observer, it was the picture of success, of a family at the apex of their world, but beneath the glittering surface, a devastating pressure was building. Ethan and Clara arrived, and a hush seemed to follow them as they moved through the crowd. The whispers were like the rustling of dry leaves. Ethan ignored them, his focus singular. He held Clara's hand, his grip firm and steady, a silent anchor in the sea of hostile eyes. Clara, dressed in an elegant maternity gown, held her head high, her earlier promise to trust him giving her a fragile strength. Eleanor, a vision in emerald silk, intercepted them near the grand terrace. Her smile was a weapon. "Clara, darling, you look radiant. Pregnancy suits you." Her eyes flickered to Ethan. "Ethan, glad you could make it." She then leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper meant for them, but audible to those nearby. "The library. In 30 minutes. Just the family. Robert is already there. Let's put this unpleasantness behind us." She swept away before they could respond. leaving a wake of cold dread. 30 minutes later, they walked into the Vance family library. It was a room designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, leather-bound books that had never been read, and a massive, unlit fireplace. Robert Vance stood by the window, staring out into the night, his shoulders slumped. Eleanor was positioned in the center of the room, standing before a large, polished desk. On the desk lay a single pristine white envelope, her envelope, the one containing the results from the local lab she had commissioned. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor began, her voice taking on the formal, commanding tone she used for board meetings. "I know this is difficult, but it is necessary. Our family's name, our legacy, is built on integrity and truth. Before we welcome a new generation, we must have absolute clarity." She looked pointedly at Ethan. "There have been questions. Unfortunate, but unavoidable. This," she said, tapping the envelope with a perfectly manicured finger, "will provide the answer." She was about to pick it up when Ethan spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority that made her pause. "Before you do that, Eleanor, I have something to say." She looked at him, annoyed by the interruption. "Ethan, this really isn't the time for speeches." "I think it is," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "For 3 years I have been a guest in your life, and you have never once made me feel welcome. You have questioned my profession, my background, my character, and my love for your daughter. You have done this privately, at your dinner table, and you have done this publicly, in front of your friends and our family." He took a step forward. The room seemed to shrink, the focus tightening on the two of them. Clara watched, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Robert turned slowly from the window. "You called my home quaint," Ethan continued, his voice still calm, a measured cadence of a prosecutor listing his evidence. "You introduced me as Clara's fiancé, with a pause designed to signal your disapproval. At my own engagement party, you toasted to the hope that I might one day be worthy of your daughter. You have systematically attempted to humiliate me, to paint me as a low-class opportunist, and I have endured it all. I endured it because I love Clara." He paused, letting the words settle in the suffocating silence. "But then you brought our unborn child into it. You called him a trap, a tactic. You slandered me to anyone who would listen, and in doing so, you slandered your own daughter. You suggested she was either a fool or promiscuous, all to satisfy your own baseless, arrogant prejudice." "How dare you," Eleanor hissed, her composure finally cracking. "I was protecting my daughter." "No," Ethan said, his voice dropping, becoming softer yet more intense. "You were protecting your pride, your obsession with status and lineage, and that obsession has led you here, to this room, to this pathetic theatrical demand for proof." He reached into his own jacket pocket. He pulled out his own envelope. It was identical to hers, but it felt heavier, laden with the weight of a far greater truth. "You want proof, Eleanor?" he said, placing his envelope on the desk beside hers. "I'll give you proof, but we're going to get the whole truth, not just your carefully curated version of it." He looked from Eleanor's furious face to Robert's stunned one, and finally to Clara, who was now openly weeping, not from fear, but from the shocking cathartic release of hearing the truth spoken aloud. The stage was set. The play was his. And the final devastating act was about to begin. Eleanor stared at the second envelope on the desk, a mirror of her own, and a flicker of uncertainty, the first she had ever shown, crossed her face. "What is this? What have you done?" "You demanded a paternity test," Ethan said, his voice a model of composure. "I agreed, but I didn't trust the local lab you chose, a lab where your family has sat on the board for 20 years. I engaged a neutral third-party facility, one of the best in the world. They are thorough." He let that word hang in the air. "My envelope contains the results of a comprehensive familial DNA panel. It doesn't just answer the question of who the father of my child is. It answers a few other questions as well." A cold fear began to seep into Eleanor's eyes, replacing the anger. She glanced at her husband, Robert, who was now watching Ethan with a new, intense focus. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer Eleanor's tribunal. It was Ethan's deposition. "This is absurd," Eleanor stammered, recovering a sliver of her bravado. A desperate trick. Open the envelope, Robert. Open our results and end this nonsense. Robert didn't move. He looked at Ethan, then at his wife. Let him finish, Eleanor. The words were quiet, but they held the weight of a final command. It was perhaps the first time in their married life he had so directly contradicted her in a moment of conflict. Ethan nodded his thanks to Robert. He then picked up Eleanor's envelope, the one she had presented with such ceremony. He tore it open with a calm, deliberate motion and slid out the single sheet of paper. He scanned it for a moment, his expression unreadable. Well, Eleanor, he said, sliding the paper across the polished desk toward her. Let's start with the good news. Your lab agrees with mine. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. I am, without any shadow of a doubt, the father of your grandchild. A wave of relief washed over Clara's face. Eleanor snatched the paper, her eyes darting over the text, confirming it. She looked up, a triumphant sneer returning to her lips. There. You see? All of this drama, and for what? I was right to be cautious. Were you? Ethan asked softly. He picked up his own envelope, the quiet bomb. We've established the truth of my child's paternity. But you said you wanted clarity. You said your family was built on integrity and truth. So let's talk about the Vance family line you're so desperate to protect. He opened the second envelope. He took out a multi-page report bound by a single staple. He didn't look at it. He already knew every word. He looked directly at Eleanor, whose face had gone pale. The comprehensive panel I requested compares the DNA of the child, the mother, and the alleged paternal and maternal grandparents, Ethan explained, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. It confirms I am the father. It confirms Clara is the mother. It confirms you, Eleanor, are Clara's biological mother. He paused, holding her gaze. But it also proves, with the exact same 99.999% certainty, that Robert Vance is not Clara's biological father. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the sound of a world shattering. Clara let out a choked, disbelieving sob. Robert stumbled back a step, his hand going to his chest as if he'd been physically struck. His face, already etched with weariness, seemed to collapse, aging a decade in a single second. Eleanor just stared, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed mask of aristocratic superiority disintegrating into raw, primal shock. No, she whispered. No, that's a lie. It's a forgery. You faked it. It's not a forgery, Ethan said, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a quiet, solemn gravity. It's from one of the most respected genetic labs on the planet. Their findings are legally indisputable. You can contest it. You can run 1,000 more tests. The answer will always be the same. He placed the report gently on the desk. For 3 years, you have judged me on my bloodline. You have obsessed over the purity of the Vance name. You built your entire identity, your entire sense of worth, on a lie. You demanded I prove my integrity while you were living a deception so profound it has defined your daughter's entire life. He turned his gaze to Robert, who looked utterly broken. I am sorry, Robert. Truly, you are the person most wronged in all of this. This was never my intention. Robert looked from the report to his wife, to the daughter he had just learned was not his. His expression was a storm of confusion, betrayal, and a strange, dawning understanding. Decades of small inconsistencies, of a daughter who looked nothing like him, of a wife's carefully guarded past. It was all coalescing into a single horrifying truth. Eleanor's shock finally gave way to a desperate, cornered rage. You did this, she shrieked at Ethan, her voice cracking. You did this to destroy me, to destroy our family. No, Eleanor, Ethan said, his voice resonating with the unshakable power of the truth. You did this. You did this 30 years ago. I just turned on the light. The immediate aftermath was chaos, condensed into a single suffocating room. Eleanor's accusations grew more frantic, more unhinged. She accused Ethan of bribery, of conspiracy. She called the Swiss lab a fraudulent enterprise, but her words were hollow, the desperate flailing of a queen whose castle had just been turned to dust. The truth had its own gravity, and it was pulling her down. Robert, after his initial staggering shock, became unnervingly still. He walked slowly to the desk and picked up the report. His hands trembled, but his eyes were clear as he read the damning conclusion. He didn't look at the complex genetic markers or the statistical analysis. He looked at the single stark sentence that invalidated the core of his life. He carefully folded the paper and put it in his own jacket pocket. Then he looked at his wife of 35 years, and for the first time, Ethan saw not a weary, defeated man, but someone looking at a complete stranger. "Who, Eleanor?" Robert's voice was a rasp, barely audible but cutting through her tirade. "Just tell me who." "It's a lie, Robert, a vicious lie," she sobbed, reaching for him. He flinched away from her touch as if from a hot iron. 30 years, Robert said, more to himself than to her. 30 years of my life. He looked at Clara, who was being held by Ethan, her body shaking with silent sobs. His expression softened into one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "She is still my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing changes that for me. But you—" He turned back to Eleanor. "You and I are finished." He walked toward the door, not with the stride of an angry man, but with the slow, deliberate pace of someone leaving a tomb. Just as he reached the door, it opened. Standing in the doorway was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, with a sharp, intelligent face and an air of quiet authority. It was Marcus Thorne, the senior founding partner of Thorne and Associates, the most feared and respected family law firm in the country, and a direct rival to the firm that had handled the Vance family's affairs for generations. Eleanor stared at him, confused. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Marcus Thorne ignored her. His eyes found Ethan. "Ethan," he said, his voice warm with familiarity. "I came as soon as I got your text. Is everything resolved?" Ethan nodded. "It is." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Eleanor, and it was the most humiliating of all. Her obsession with status, with belonging to the right club, and knowing the right people, was her fatal flaw. She knew exactly who Marcus Thorne was. He was a legal titan, a man who moved in circles even she could not easily access. And he was speaking to Ethan, to quiet, unremarkable Ethan, as an equal, as a client, as a friend. You know him?" she stammered, looking from Ethan to Marcus. Marcus Thorne finally turned his cool gaze upon her. "I've known Ethan for years. My firm has had the privilege of representing Nexus Design on several international acquisitions." He let the name hang in the air. Nexus Design, the almost mythical architectural firm that was reshaping skylines across the globe. A firm whose founder was famously, fiercely anonymous. Eleanor's mind reeled. The local firm, the public works project, the simple watch. It was all a facade, a deliberate choice. He wasn't a weed in her garden. He was a redwood, and she had been trying to trim him with nail scissors. She had not only misjudged his character, she had catastrophically misjudged his status, the one metric she held above all others. It was the ultimate soul-crushing irony. The man she had spent 3 years deriding as a low-class nobody was, in all likelihood, wealthier and more powerful than her entire family. "Nexus?" she whispered, the word barely forming on her lips. Ethan gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I prefer a quiet life, Eleanor. I find it more fulfilling." He used the exact words he had used at their first dinner, and the echo of them now was a devastating indictment. The fight went out of her completely. The rage, the denial, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, defeated woman. She had lost everything: her husband, the respect of her daughter, her social standing, which would be in tatters once this story inevitably leaked, and worst of all, her own sense of superiority. She had been blind, a fool. She sank into one of the leather chairs, her emerald dress suddenly looking garish and cheap. She was a ruin in her own library. Robert paused at the door, looking back at Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, I may require your services." "My door is always open," Marcus replied with a respectful nod. Robert's gaze then fell on Clara and Ethan. He looked at his daughter, his heart in his eyes. "I love you, Clara," he said, before turning and walking out of the room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving a world of wreckage in his wake. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow, painful unfolding of consequences. The story of Eleanor's downfall did not leak. It flooded the elite social circles she had once ruled. Marcus Thorne's presence at the estate that night, coupled with Robert's immediate and public separation from Eleanor, created a narrative that was impossible to contain. The tale was told in hushed tones at country clubs and charity luncheons, a modern-day moral fable about hubris and hidden truths. Eleanor Vance, the self-appointed arbiter of social standing, became a pariah overnight. Her friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations ceased to arrive. She was trapped in the gilded cage of her mansion, a prisoner of the same judgment she had so mercilessly wielded against others. Robert, true to his word, retained Marcus Thorne. He didn't seek a punitive divorce. He sought truth. He moved into a quiet city apartment and began the painstaking process of untangling his life from Eleanor's. He also began a discreet search, not for the man who was Clara's biological father. He had no interest in recrimination, but for an answer to the question that now defined his past. He needed closure. His relationship with Clara, however, deepened. Freed from the oppressive influence of Eleanor, they began to build a new bond, one based not on a lie, but on a shared, painful truth. He was more of a father to her in those weeks than he had been in the preceding 30 years. The most complex fallout was between Ethan and Clara. The revelation had shattered Clara's world, forcing her to confront the fact that her entire life, her very identity, was built on a foundation of deceit. But more than that, she had to confront her own complicity, her own weakness. She had stood by silently while the man she loved was humiliated, all to appease a mother who was, herself, a fraud. They sat together in their sunlit living room a week after the gala. The tension that had filled the house for months was gone, replaced by a fragile, uncertain calm. Clara had been quiet, processing the immense trauma of the event. "I am so sorry, Ethan," she said finally, her voice raw with shame. "I was a coward. I saw how she treated you. I knew it was wrong, and I did nothing. I chose her feelings over your dignity. I chose her lies over our truth." Tears streamed down her face, tears of genuine remorse. "Can you ever forgive me?" Ethan looked at her, at the woman he had fallen in love with in a dusty library. He saw past the fear and the conditioning and saw the good, genuine soul that was still there. His goal had never been to punish Clara. It had been to liberate her. "There is nothing to forgive, Yaris," he said, his voice gentle. "You were trapped too, Clara, in a different way. She built that cage for you over 30 years. It's not your fault you didn't know how to get out. The only thing that matters is what we do now." He reached out and took her hand. "Our foundation was cracked. It was built on a compromise. I accepted your fear, and you accepted my humiliation. We can't build a family on that. We have to tear it down and start over, on solid ground, on honesty, no matter how painful. I want that," she whispered, clutching his hand. "More than anything. I choose you, Ethan. I choose our family, our truth." It was the beginning of their true marriage. The conversations that followed were long and difficult. Clara mourned the father she had known and simultaneously got to know the real one. She had to process the betrayal of her mother, a wound that would take years to heal. She made the difficult decision to cut off all contact with Eleanor, recognizing that her mother's influence was a poison she could no longer allow in her life. Ethan, in turn, slowly began to dismantle the wall he had built between his personal and professional lives. He told Clara everything about Nexus Design, about his journey, about the reasons he had chosen a life of quiet anonymity. He showed her the plans for the projects he was working on, the cities he was helping to shape. For the first time, she saw the full measure of the man she had married. Not his wealth or his power, those things didn't matter to her, but the scale of his passion, his intellect, and his integrity. Her love, once a simple, pure affection, was now alloyed with a profound and deep respect. As the weeks turned into months, a new normal began to emerge. The wreckage of the old world was cleared away, making space for something new and stronger to grow. They were no longer defined by the Vance legacy, but by the one they were building together, brick by brick, truth by truth. The child growing within Clara was no longer a point of contention, but a symbol of their future, a future built not on a pristine, false lineage, but on the messy, beautiful, and honest foundation of their love. 6 months later, the city was draped in the crisp golden light of autumn. Ethan and Clara stood in the nearly completed nursery of their home. The room was painted a soft, warm white, and the afternoon sun streamed through the large window that overlooked their garden. Clara, now in the final trimester of her pregnancy, rested a hand on her belly, a serene smile on her face. The anxiety that had shadowed her for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident joy. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and placing his hands over hers on her belly. They stood there for a moment, in comfortable silence, watching the leaves fall outside. Their life was no longer a drama. It was a partnership. Clara had kept her word. She had severed ties with Eleanor, a decision that was painful but necessary for her own healing and the health of her new family. Eleanor remained a recluse in her mansion, a ghost of her former self. The few who saw her reported a woman diminished, her fire extinguished, left with nothing but her wealth and the bitter ashes of her pride. Robert had become a fixture in their lives. He visited weekly, his weariness replaced by a gentle grandfatherly enthusiasm. He had finished his divorce from Eleanor and, through his own quiet investigation, had found a measure of peace. He discovered that Clara's biological father had been a university professor Eleanor had a brief affair with, a brilliant but gentle man who had passed away years ago. There was no scandal to unearth, no fortune to claim. There was only a sad human story of a youthful mistake and a lifetime of fear. Knowing the truth, Robert was able to finally let go of the anger and embrace the daughter he had always loved, his bond with her now stronger and more honest than ever. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, leaning her head back against Ethan's shoulder. "I was thinking about structures," Ethan replied, his voice thoughtful. "How some are built for show. All facade with weak foundations. They look impressive, but they can't withstand a storm. And how others are built for strength. The foundations are deep, the materials are honest. They might not look as flashy, but they're the ones that last. They're the ones that become a home." Clara turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with love and understanding. "We're building a home, Ethan," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, kissing her forehead. "We are." The journey they had been on was a testament to a simple, profound truth, that true worth is not found in a name, a bank account, or a bloodline. It's found in character, in integrity, in the courage to stand for the truth, even when it's painful. Ethan had never sought revenge. He had sought justice. He had not wanted to destroy Eleanor. He had wanted to protect his family. Her destruction was merely a byproduct of her own actions, the inevitable collapse of a structure built on lies, poetic justice in its purest form. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that the respect we demand is worthless, while the respect we earn is priceless. Arrogance and pride are blinding, causing us to underestimate those we deem beneath us, never realizing that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. It's a lesson in the difference between appearance and reality, and a celebration of the quiet strength that ultimately triumphs over loud, empty dominance. In the end, Ethan and Clara's victory wasn't in the downfall of their antagonist, but in the construction of their own unbreakable bond, creating a legacy not of wealth or status, but of love, honesty, and resilience. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it the danger of pride, the importance of standing up for your partner, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your perspectives, and if you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that make you think and feel. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you in the next one.